A little girl of just 6 years old lived alone in a shack in the backyard of a vacant lot. On one of the coldest nights of the year, she lit a candle to warm herself, but fell asleep from exhaustion and hunger. At dawn, she was awakened by shouts. Men in suits surrounded the lot. A powerful millionaire had ordered all the shacks demolished, but what happened when he took a silver lighter and set fire to the shack with his own hands would forever change their destinies. What no one expected was to discover the devastating truth that connected them. Subscribe to the channel to receive heartwarming stories every day. The office on the 40th floor mirrored the coldness of its owner. Bulletproof glass reflected. The city stretching out below like a chessboard, where every move was calculated, every piece expendable. The millionaire adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt as he reviewed the morning reports. Numbers. Always numbers. Profits rising like skyscrapers, expenses cut down like weeds. The secretary entered silently, placing a cup of coffee on the polished mahogany desk. He didn't even look up from the documents. To him, people were resources, replaceable and measurable. He had built his empire on this premise, transforming every interaction into a transaction, every feeling into a strategy. The intercom buzzed. On the other end, the project manager's voice sounded nervous. "Sir, about the lot downtown, there's still some resistance." The millionaire clenched his fists. This project represented millions in profit, a luxury condominium complex that would transform a blighted area into valuable real estate. There would be no resistance. There would be no obstacles. "Take care of it today." His voice sliced through the air like a sharp blade. "I don't want to know the details. I want results." Meanwhile, across town, in a shack made of plywood and corrugated iron, a 6-year-old girl woke up shivering. The morning cold seeped through the cracks in the poorly fitted boards, and her small bare feet touched the packed dirt floor. She curled up, pulling a tattered blanket to her chin. Her big, dark eyes scanned the room for something that could give her warmth. The melted wax candle on an old can had gone out during the night, leaving only the smell of smoke in the air. She had lit it the day before when the cold had become unbearable, but exhaustion and hunger had overcome her before she could put it out. The girl knew she was alone, not by choice, but by circumstances that a child shouldn't have to understand. For the past 3 years, that makeshift shack in the backyard of a vacant lot had become her only home. She had learned to survive on the scraps she found, to hide when strange men passed by, to light small fires to ward off the cold of the city nights. Her only companions were a faded teddy bear, with one eye missing, and the stray cats that occasionally appeared looking for shelter. She shared with them the little food she could find, whispering imaginary stories to the toy when the loneliness became unbearable. On this particular morning, something was different. A distant rumble grew on the horizon, the sound of powerful engines and male voices approaching. The girl hid behind a pile of planks, watching through a crack in the wall. Huge trucks parked at the entrance to the lot. Men in suits got out, followed by workers in yellow hard hats and heavy machinery. Their voices echoed through the cold. Morning, discussing deadlines, orders, and procedures. The child didn't fully understand what was happening, but a familiar sense of danger grew in her chest. It was the same feeling she had felt on that terrible night 3 years ago, when she lost everything she knew. The same fear that made her wake up screaming in recurring nightmares. She hugged the teddy bear tighter, whispering words of comfort that she had once heard from someone very dear. Words that now sounded like distant echoes of a past she could barely remember, but that her heart insisted on preserving. The millionaire, at that same moment, was closing another deal in his office, completely ignoring that his next decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. For him, that lot was just another number on a spreadsheet. For her, it was the last piece of the world she could still call her own. The entourage arrived at the lot like a silent invasion. 3 black Mercedes parked in military formation, followed by demolition trucks and security vehicles. The millionaire emerged from the central vehicle, adjusting the buttons of his wool coat. His eyes scanned the surroundings with the same coldness with which he analyzed financial reports. "How long to clear all this out?" he asked the project. A manager, who was nervously consulting a clipboard. "Sir, technically we need to check if there are any residents." "Residents?" The word came out of his mouth as if it was something repugnant. "This is private property. Any squatters should have already been removed." The demolition team positioned itself strategically. Bulldozers roared in neutral, waiting for orders. Security cameras were quickly installed to document the process. The millionaire always recorded his operations, a legal precaution that had become an obsession with control. From her hiding place, the girl watched the commotion with her heart racing. Uniformed men walked among the rubble of other shacks already torn down, checking every corner. She knew it was only a matter of time. Before they found her refuge, her little hands trembled as she hugged the teddy bear. For 3 years, that place had protected her from the elements and the dangers of the street. It wasn't much. 4 plywood walls, a leaky tin roof, a dirt floor. But it was hers. It was where she kept her few memories, where she talked to her only stuffed friend, where she dreamed of a different tomorrow. One of the security guards approached the shack. He was an older man with graying hair and a tired expression. Unlike the others, he walked slowly, as if reluctant to fulfill his function. His experienced eyes had seen many injustices over the years, and something about this operation deeply disturbed him. "Boss!" he called out, addressing the millionaire. "There's someone in here!" The businessman approached with firm steps, irritation growing on his face. "What do you mean, someone? My legal team assured me the lot was unoccupied." "It's a child, sir." The words hung in the air like an accusation. The millionaire squinted through a crack in the wooden wall. Inside, huddled in a corner, was the girl. Her huge eyes watched him with a mixture of fear and defiance that caught him off guard. For an instant, something strange stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades, a distant echo of humanity that he thought he had buried along with his vulnerabilities. But the moment passed too quickly to be processed. "A trespasser," he muttered, recomposing his cold mask. "Remove her." The security guard hesitated. "Sir, she's just a kid. Maybe we should call Child Protective Services." "I don't pay you to think." The millionaire's voice cut off any objection. "Remove her and demolish this, now!" But the girl didn't come out. When the security guard approached, she retreated even further, clutching the teddy bear as if her life depended on it. Her small legs carried her to the back of the shack, where a pile of rags formed something resembling a bed. "No," she whispered, the first word she had uttered in days. "Please, no." The childish voice echoed through the tense environment, breaking the professional silence of the operation. Even the workers stopped to watch. There was something in the child's plea that touched a primal part of humanity, an instinct to protect that transcended hierarchies and protocols. The millionaire felt the eyes turning to him. His authority was being challenged by a 6-year-old. The situation was absurd and at the same time revealing. He had built an empire based on the premise that feelings were weaknesses, that compassion was a luxury he couldn't afford. 5 minutes, he announced coldly. "If she doesn't leave voluntarily, we'll remove her." The girl seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Her eyes filled with tears that she refused to shed. She had learned very early on that crying didn't change anything, that pleas fell on deaf ears, that in the end she was alone against a world that didn't care about her existence. But still, she didn't move. That shack represented more than shelter. It was identity. It was history. It was the only thing left of the world she had once known. The millionaire's mental timer began to count down, and with each second that passed, the tension in the air thickened, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. The 5 minutes dragged on like hours. The millionaire consulted his Swiss watch repeatedly, his patience evaporating under the expectant gaze of the team. The girl remained motionless in her corner, clutching the teddy bear like a fragile statue sculpted in despair and determination. "Time's up," he announced, his voice cutting through the morning air like an axe. The older security guard took a hesitant step towards the shack. His 40 years of experience in private security had taught him to distinguish between real threats and situations that simply required humanity. That child was not a trespasser. She was a victim of circumstances, abandoned by the society that was now evicting her again. "Sir," he tried once more, maybe you could do your job without questioning my orders." The response came as sharp as a razor. The millionaire had built his empire by eliminating hesitations, cutting any sign of weakness at the root. He would not allow a 6-year-old to jeopardize a multi-million-dollar project. The tension was palpable. The workers exchanged uncomfortable glances, some lowering their heads. They weren't paid to have a conscience, just to perform tasks. But there was something in the scene that defied professionalism, that appealed to parts of their personalities that they had learned to suppress in the workplace. The project manager approached, whispering nervously, "Sir, the cameras are recording everything. If this leaks to the media will see a responsible businessman clearing his property of squatters," he replied without hesitation. Nothing more, nothing less. But inside, something was beginning to stir. A strange unease, as if a voice buried for decades was trying to emerge from deep layers of his consciousness. He suffocated it immediately. There was no room for doubts in his world. Doubts were a luxury that men in his position couldn't afford. The girl, realizing that time was up, did something unexpected. Instead of surrendering or crying, she stood up slowly, holding the teddy bear against her chest, her small eyes fixed directly on the millionaires, traversing all the physical and emotional distance that separated them. "This is my home," she said, with a clarity that surprised everyone. It wasn't a plea, but a simple and devastating statement of dignity. "I have nowhere else to go." The words echoed through the lot like a gunshot. Grown men, accustomed to multi-million-dollar negotiations and complex corporate decisions, found themselves confronted with the brutal honesty of a child who possessed only a teddy bear and 4 rotten wooden walls. The millionaire felt something constrict in his chest. For a split second, a fleeting image crossed his mind. Himself, decades ago, small and vulnerable, begging for something he couldn't obtain. The image disappeared as quickly as it appeared, but it left a mark, like an old scar that aches again when the weather changes. "Remove her," he ordered, but his voice sounded less firm than he intended. The security guard hesitated again. All his professional experience had taught him to obey orders without questioning, but his experience as a human being, as a father, as a grandfather, screamed against what was being demanded of him. "With all due respect, sir," he said, each word heavy as lead, "I can't do that." The silence that followed was deafening. 30 men watched a silent rebellion happen before their eyes. An ordinary employee defying one of the city's most powerful businessmen because of an abandoned child. The millionaire approached the security guard, his eyes gleaming with a cold fury. "You're fired." "Yes, sir," the man replied calmly. "But I won't take a 6-year-old child from her only shelter." The situation had completely escaped control. What should have been a routine operation had turned into a public moral confrontation. The cameras recorded every second, every word, every expression of embarrassment on the faces of the team. The millionaire looked around, seeing his authority being questioned by subordinates, his efficiency being compromised by sentimentality. Decades of carefully building a reputation for firmness were being threatened by a child who refused to leave a shack. It was then that he made the decision that would change everything. He walked to one of the vehicles and returned with a silver lighter, an expensive piece he had won in a particularly successful corporate merger. His steps were firm, determined. If no one else would do what was necessary, he would do it himself. "If you don't have the stomach for what needs to be done," he announced to the entire team, "I do." The girl watched the man approach her home with fire in his hand, and for the first time in 3 years, she truly allowed herself to feel fear. The silver lighter gleamed in the morning sun like a cruel jewel. The millionaire held it firmly, his fingers adjusting to the cold metal with the same precision with which he signed multi-million-dollar contracts. There was no hesitation in his movements, only the icy determination of a man accustomed to turning obstacles into ashes. "Trash like this shouldn't exist," he declared, his voice echoing through the silent lot. The security cameras captured every word, every gesture, recording for posterity a moment that would become historic for the wrong reasons. The small blue flame danced on the tip of the lighter. It was almost poetic, that delicate light that carried so much destructive power. The millionaire approached the dry planks of the shack, where 3 years of weathering had made the wood more vulnerable than paper. The girl retreated to the back of the tiny space, squeezing the teddy bear against her chest. Her big eyes reflected the small flame growing before her, but it wasn't just fear that was seen in that look. There was something deeper, a premature understanding of human cruelty, a painful acceptance that the world could be relentless. With the vulnerable, "Please," she whispered one last time, but her voice was lost in the cold morning wind. The fire touched the first plank. The dry wood ignited immediately, as if it had been waiting for that moment. The flames spread with frightening speed, fueled by the cold air and the thirst for destruction that permeated the environment. The team watched in sepulchral silence. Some looked away, unable to witness the scene. Others remained fixed, as if they were watching a traffic accident, horrified but unable to turn away. The fired security guard clenched his fists, fighting against all the instincts that screamed for him to intervene. In a matter of minutes, what had been a home turned into a bonfire. The flames licked the walls with voracious hunger, consuming not only wood and tin, but stories, memories, dreams. The heat intensified rapidly, creating a deadly barrier between the girl and the only exit. It was then that the unthinkable happened. Instead of running to the door, trying to escape the approaching flames, the girl moved in the opposite direction. She ran to the back of the shack, where a pile of rags guarded her most precious treasure. Not just the teddy bear she was already carrying, but a small metal box where she kept her only memories. "No!" The security guard's shout tore through the air. For the first time in decades of profession, he saw a child consciously run towards danger, not out of ignorance, but out of love. Love for objects that for any adult would seem insignificant, but that for her represented everything that remained of a previous life. The smoke began to engulf the interior of the shack. The girl coughed violently, her small lungs fighting against the increasingly toxic air. But she continued searching, her small hands rummaging among the rags and debris in search of the little box that held a faded photo and a simple ring, the only evidence that she had once belonged to someone. The millionaire watched the scene with an expression that oscillated between satisfaction and something he refused to name. There was something disturbing in that child's determination, something that echoed memories he preferred to keep buried. Why didn't she just run? Why risk her life for worthless trinkets? The flames advanced inexorably. The tin roof began to sag, preparing to collapse on the girl who was still searching for her treasures on the smoke-covered floor. The heat had become unbearable, even for the men who watched from the outside. It was at that moment that the fired security guard made the decision that would define not only that day, but the rest of his life. Ignoring the warning shouts, the confused orders, the legal threats that rained down around him, he ran towards the flames. His heavy boots broke through the door that was beginning to fall apart from the fire. Black smoke engulfed him immediately, burning his eyes and filling his lungs with poison. But he didn't stop. Guided only by intuition and by decades of experience in emergency situations, he moved through the artificial hell towards the sound of the child's cough. He found the girl passed out, overcome by the smoke, her little fingers still clutching the teddy bear and the metal box she had finally located. Without hesitation, he lifted her in his arms, protecting her fragile body with his own body as he headed for the exit. The emergency was a matter of seconds, but it seemed to last an eternity. The man emerged from the flames like a mythical figure, covered in soot, coughing violently, but carrying the unconscious child to safety. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. 30 men watched the security guard kneeling on the ground, trying to revive a girl who'd almost died for a little box of memories, while the millionaire remained motionless, the lighter still in his hand, contemplating the consequences of his decision. The cameras had recorded everything, and at that moment, everyone knew that something fundamental had changed forever. The video leaked on social media before the smoke had even completely dissipated. In an era where every person carried a camera in their pocket, it was impossible to completely control the narrative. One of the workers, shocked by what he had witnessed, had discreetly filmed the final moments of the fire and the heroic rescue. The title of the post was simple and devastating: "Millionaire sets fire to shack with child inside." In 6 hours, the video reached 500,000 views. In 12 hours, it was on the main news channels in the country. In 24 hours, it had become a global phenomenon, translated into dozens of languages and shared millions of times, with hashtags that called for justice. The millionaire watched the chaos unfold from his bulletproof office. His public relations department worked in a state of panic, trying to control a crisis that grew exponentially with each passing minute. Lawyers drafted defense strategies, advisors prepared official statements, but nothing seemed capable of containing the tsunami of public outrage. "Sir," his secretary entered the office with a pale face. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing. It's journalists, activists, investigators, and the shareholders are calling an emergency meeting." He didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the computer screen, where he repeatedly watched the moment he had lit the lighter. There was something hypnotic and terrible in that image. A man in an impeccable suit destroying a child's only home with the coldness of someone blowing out a candle. Meanwhile, at the hospital where the girl was recovering from smoke inhalation, the security guard who had saved her became a reluctant hero. Journalists surrounded the building, all wanting to interview the man who had risked his life to save a stranger. But he refused all approaches, preferring to remain by the child's bedside, watching over her restless sleep. The girl awoke occasionally, confused and scared. Her first gesture was always to look for the teddy bear and the metal box, which the security guard had carefully preserved during the rescue. When she confirmed that her treasures were safe, she went back to sleep, allowing the sedatives to take her away from the cruel reality that awaited her upon waking. It was during one of these vigils that the investigative journalist arrived. Unlike the others, he wasn't just interested in the sensational story of the moment. There was something in the situation that had sparked his professional curiosity, inconsistencies that deserved deeper investigation. Why was a 6-year-old child living alone on that lot? He asked the security guard. Where are her parents? How did she survive alone for so long? The older man shook his head slowly. She doesn't talk much. Just says her mother went away with the fire 3 years ago. The phrase echoed in the journalist's mind like a warning bell. Fire. 3 years. He began to connect dots that perhaps no one else had noticed. That night, while the country debated business ethics and children's rights, the journalist rummaged through police files, death records, fire reports. He searched for a woman who had died in fire-related circumstances approximately 3 years earlier, leaving a young daughter. What he found was a story that would make the current scandal just the tip of a much darker iceberg. Her name was Maria Santos, a cleaning lady at one of the companies in the Millionaire's business group, suddenly fired after reporting labor irregularities, killed in an accidental fire during a forced eviction in a shantytown that, coincidentally, was also being removed to make way for a real estate development. But what shocked the journalist the most was the document he found in the company files, a birth certificate stating that Maria Santos had declared a father for her daughter. A name she had never revealed publicly, but that was officially registered. The name of the millionaire's son, the young heir, who had died in a car accident 2 years before the girl's birth. The truth was more complex and devastating than any fiction. The millionaire had not only set fire to the home of an innocent child, he had tried to eliminate his own granddaughter, the only blood descendant he had left in the world. The journalist stayed up until dawn, checking and rechecking the information. DNA tests would be needed for absolute confirmation, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Dates coincided, places connected, and the physical resemblance between the girl and the businessman's deceased son was undeniable for those who knew where to look. When the sun rose, the journalist knew that he held in his hands not just a story, but a bomb that would explode the foundations of the city's most powerful empire. The question that tormented him was simple: how to reveal such a devastating truth without completely destroying the girl who had become, involuntarily, the center of everything. The answer would come sooner than he imagined, because on the other side of town, the millionaire had also spent the night rummaging through files and beginning to suspect the same terrible truth that the journalist had just discovered. The millionaire trembled as he held the birth certificate. His hands, accustomed to the firmness of multi-million-dollar negotiations, wavered like leaves in the wind. The document had been located by his private lawyers, who were investigating possible legal complications arising from the incident. None of them expected to find a genealogical bomb: Maria Santos. The name echoed in his memory like a resurrected ghost. He vaguely remembered the woman, a discreet cleaning lady who had worked in his offices for a few years. A memory that became clearer when she began to make complaints about working conditions, demanding rights that he considered excessive for someone in her position. The dismissal had been calculated and cruel. He had used his influence to ensure that she couldn't get a job at any major company in the city. This was how he dealt with problem employees. Eliminating them from the market like a predator removes threats from his territory. But the child's father's name paralyzed him completely: Gabriel Santos Mendonça, his son, his only son. Memories began to reconnect like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Gabriel had become rebellious in the last years of his life, constantly confronting his father's decisions, questioning the family's business methods. He had mentioned several times a girlfriend that his father would never understand, someone he loved but who belonged to a different world. The millionaire had assumed that it was an adolescent phase, a typical rebellion that would pass with time. He had never deeply investigated his son's relationships, considering them irrelevant to the family business. Now, that negligence came back to haunt him with a devastating force. Gabriel had died in a car accident 2 years before the girl's birth. The dates aligned perfectly with a cruel precision of fate. Maria Santos had registered the paternity posthumously, using documents that proved the relationship. The young man had never known he would be a father. He had died weeks before Maria discovered the pregnancy. The businessman stood up abruptly, knocking over the Italian leather chair. His legs faltered, forcing him to lean on the mahogany table. For 52 years, he had built his identity on pillars of control and rationality. Now those pillars crumbled like sandcastles before the tide. He had set fire to the home of his own granddaughter. The child he had observed with disdain, whom he had classified as trash, was the only descendant of his blood left in the world. The last living vestige of Gabriel, the son he had loved in his distant and authoritarian way, but whom he had lost before learning to demonstrate that love. His hands trembled as he dialed the hospital number. He needed to see her. He needed to confirm with his own eyes what the documents already declared with mathematical clarity. He needed to face the weight of his actions before the whole world discovered the truth. At the hospital, the girl had woken up more alert. Doctors confirmed that she would fully recover from smoke inhalation, but recommended psychological observation due to the trauma. The security guard remained by her side, having become a makeshift father figure that she had accepted with the naturalness of someone who had always been alone in the world. "What's your name?" the man asked gently, offering her a glass of water. "Anna," she replied shyly. "Anna Santos." The surname hit the security guard like a bullet. He vaguely remembered an employee named Maria Santos who had worked for the company a few years earlier, a kind woman who always greeted the security guards with a sincere smile, treating them as human beings instead of invisible furniture. "Your mother? Her name was Maria?" The girl's eyes filled with tears that she struggled to contain. "Mommy went away with the fire. She said she would wait for me, but she never came back." The devastating simplicity of the childish explanation revealed a tragedy that transcended any corporate drama. A 3-year-old child had lost her mother in violent circumstances and had survived alone for 3 years, feeding on hope and memories. Kept in a metal box. It was at that moment that the millionaire arrived at the hospital. He had used all his influence to bypass security protocols and visiting hours. Money and power opened doors that should have remained closed, allowing him access to the room where his granddaughter was recovering under the care of the man he had fired hours before. The encounter was tense and silent. The security guard stood up automatically, conditioned by decades of professional hierarchy, but his eyes gleamed with a contained fury that decades of labor diplomacy could not disguise. "Sir," he said, each word loaded with thinly veiled contempt. "I didn't expect to." "See you here." The millionaire didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the girl, looking for similarities that would confirm what the documents had already revealed. And they were there. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the color of the hair. Characteristics that he recognized. From photographs of Gabriel as a child, familiar traits that had skipped generations to resurface in the face of that abandoned girl. "Anna," he said, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. She looked at him with curiosity mixed with fear. He was the man who had burned down her home, but there was something in his current expression that she couldn't understand. A vulnerability that contrasted with the coldness she had witnessed in the vacant lot. "Why did you burn my house?" she asked with the brutal honesty that only children possess. The question echoed through the room like a divine accusation. The millionaire had no answer that could justify his actions, no explanation that transformed cruelty into business logic. For the first time in decades, he found himself completely disarmed in the face of a situation that his money and influence could not solve. "I didn't know," he began, but the words died in his throat. How to explain to a 6-year-old child that he had tried to destroy her existence out of ignorance and arrogance? How to confess that he had discovered too late that she was the most important person he had ever known existed? The security guard watched the interaction with fascination and repulsion. There was something deeply disturbing in seeing such a powerful man being reduced to silence by a simple question from a child. It was like watching a god discovering his own mortality. "Sir," the man said finally, "maybe it's best if you leave. The girl needs to rest." But the millionaire didn't move. He was hypnotized by the sight of his granddaughter, by this child who carried the blood of Gabriel and who had survived 3 years of abandonment with a strength he never imagined possible. She represented everything he had lost and everything he could still have: family, legacy, redemption. And then, in a moment of devastating clarity, he understood the magnitude of what he had done. Not only had he tried to destroy his only remaining family, but he had perpetuated the same pattern of coldness and rejection that had destroyed his relationship with Gabriel. It was as if fate was offering him a second chance, and he had almost eliminated it with a silver lighter. Truth was revealed, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. On the other side of the city, the investigative journalist prepared the story that would transform that private discovery into public knowledge, forever changing the lives of all involved. The headline occupied the front page of every newspaper. In the country, millionaire sets fire to own granddaughter's home. The story had leaked during the early hours of the morning through multiple sources, creating a tsunami of public outrage that swept away any possibility of controlling the narrative. The investigative journalist had worked all night with a team of forensic geneticists, lawyers specializing in children's rights, and private investigators. The material he presented to the public was irrefutable. Official documents, witnesses, DNA tests requested on an emergency basis, and a timeline that connected 3 years of family tragedies with the precision of a macabre puzzle. The complete story was even more shocking than the initial incident. Maria Santos had not only been unfairly fired, she had been systematically persecuted and prevented from working at any major company in the city. The millionaire had used his influence to destroy the life of a woman who carried his only granddaughter in her womb, forcing her to live in subhuman conditions until she died in another violent eviction. Social media exploded with a collective fury that transcended social classes and political ideologies. Hashtags like "Justice for Anna" and "Justice Millionaire Killer" dominated global trends. Videos analyzing every second of the original recording accumulated millions of views, with body language experts dissecting every expression of the businessman as he set fire to the shack. At the hospital, Anna had become the center of a media storm that she couldn't understand. Reporters surrounded the building. Human rights activists demanded her custody, and lawyers specializing in family neglect cases offered to represent her for free. The security guard who had saved her found himself in the impossible position of protecting a 6-year-old from a society that suddenly cared too much about her well-being. "I don't understand why everyone is shouting," Anna said, watching from the hospital window the crowds that gathered on the street. "Are they angry at me?" The security guard knelt beside the bed, choosing his words carefully. "No, honey, they're angry at whoever hurt you. They're trying to protect you." "But I don't need protection," she replied, with the simple logic of childhood. "I know how to take care of myself." The phrase echoed through the room, like a devastating echo of 3 years of abandonment. A 6-year-old child who had learned prematurely that she couldn't depend on anyone, who had developed a brutal independence as a survival mechanism. It was simultaneously inspiring and deeply tragic. Meanwhile, the millionaire's office had become a bunker under siege. Shareholders demanded his immediate resignation, business partners cancelled contracts, and employees resigned en masse. His company, built over 3 decades, crumbled in a matter of hours like a house of cards in a hurricane. His lawyers worked in emergency mode, trying to build defense strategies that seemed increasingly useless as new details of the story leaked to the press. How to defend a man who had set fire to his own granddaughter's home. How to justify 3 years of systematic persecution that resulted in the death of the child's mother. "Sir," his lead attorney said, his voice laden with resignation, "frankly, there is no possible defense. The evidence is overwhelming, and public opinion has already judged and condemned you. Our only option is to minimize the damage and try to negotiate some kind of settlement." The millionaire remained in his office, watching through the bulletproof glass the crowds that gathered on the street, holding signs with photos of Anna and demanding justice. It was surreal to see his own granddaughter being used as a symbol of struggle against him, as if she represented all the vulnerable children he had ignored throughout his ruthless business career. But what tormented him most wasn't the destruction of his financial empire or the ruin of his reputation. It was the image of Anna asking why he had burned her house, the devastating simplicity of a child trying to understand the cruelty of an adult world that should protect her. It was then that the news arrived that would transform the situation. From complex to impossible, the district attorney had filed a motion to strip him of his parental rights that he technically possessed as Anna's only living relative, but that he had completely ignored until discovering her existence. Simultaneously, Child Protective Services initiated procedures to place the girl under state protection, arguing that she could not remain in the custody of someone who had tried to kill her. The irony was cruel and perfect. He had discovered that he had a granddaughter at the same moment that he lost any legal right to approach her. The judicial system, pressured by public opinion, moved with impressive efficiency to definitively separate grandfather and granddaughter. But there was a problem that no lawyer had foreseen. Anna didn't want to go to a foster home. She had developed a bond with the security guard who had saved her, considering him the only father figure she had ever known. And he, in turn, had fallen in love with the brave child who had survived alone for 3 years, seeing in her the daughter he had never had. The legal situation had become a Gordian knot. Anna couldn't stay with the millionaire who had tried to kill her, couldn't be forced into a foster home that she rejected, and couldn't legally stay with a man who had no family relationship with her. The legal system, designed to protect children, proved incapable of dealing with a case that transcended all conventional categories. Public pressure continued to grow. Politicians made outraged statements. Celebrities shared the story on their social media, and international human rights organizations began to monitor the case. Anna had become involuntarily a global symbol of social injustice, her image circulating around the world as a representation of all children abandoned by the system. And at the center of all this, a 6-year-old girl just wanted them to stop shouting, to leave her alone with her teddy bear and her memory box, to allow her to go back to living in silence as she had learned to do during 3 years of forced solitude. The storm was just beginning, and no one knew how it would end. But one thing was certain: the whole world was watching, and any resolution would have to satisfy not only the needs of a traumatized child, but also the thirst for justice of an outraged society that had finally found a perfect villain for its collective anger. The most difficult decision of the millionaire's life was made during a sleepless night, when the protests outside his building finally ceased and he was left alone with the weight of his actions. Sitting in his leather armchair, surrounded by the wreckage of an empire that had taken decades to build, he understood that he had reached the moment to choose between preserving the fragments of his reputation or completely embracing the truth. The Next morning, against all the advice of his lawyers, he did something that no one expected. He called a press conference. The ballroom of the five-star hotel was packed. Journalists from all countries, television cameras, photographers, and human rights activists crowded into a space that barely accommodated half that number. The air was charged with expectation and hostility, as if everyone expected to witness a spectacle of public humiliation. The millionaire entered the room without his usual impeccable suit. He wore simple clothes, there was no gel in his hair, and his eyes showed evident signs of sleepless nights. For the first time in decades, he looked truly human, vulnerable, broken, real. "I have not come here to defend myself," he began, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "I have come to confess." The phrase caused a ripple in the audience. Lawyers whispered urgently to each other, journalists adjusted their recorders, and cameras zoomed in to capture every nuance of his expression. "My name is Eduardo Mendonça, and I am a murderer." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the press officers, accustomed to corporate scandals, seemed shocked by the brutal frankness of the statement. "I killed Maria Santos as surely as if I had lit the fire that consumed her. I used my influence to destroy her life, to make her unemployable, to force her to live in subhuman conditions. When she died in that eviction, it was because I put her there." Tears began to stream down his face, decades of repressed emotions, finally finding release. "And 3 days ago, I tried to kill her daughter, my own granddaughter, the only family I have left in the world." The confession continued for 20 minutes. He detailed every cruel decision, every action calculated to destroy Maria Santos's life. He explained how his arrogance and coldness had blinded him to the humanity of the people he considered inferior. He revealed corporate secrets that implicated other companies in similar practices, transforming his personal confession into a systemic denunciation. "Ana Santos is my granddaughter," he said, looking directly at the cameras. "Daughter of Gabriel, my son, who died without knowing he would be a father. She survived 3 years alone because of me. She learned to take care of herself because I eliminated all the people who could take care of her." At the hospital, Anna watched the live broadcast on the tablet that a nurse had lent her. She didn't fully understand the complex words, but she understood the emotion. For the first time, she saw that cold man demonstrating genuine feelings, recognizing that he had done something wrong. "He's crying," she said to the security guard, who was also watching with morbid fascination. "Yes, honey, he is." "Why?" The simple question echoed the complexity of the situation. How to explain to a 6-year-old child the intricacies of guilt, redemption, the belated recognition of humanity in other human beings. "Because he understood that he hurt you," the security guard replied carefully, "and he's sad for having done that." Anna pondered the answer with the seriousness of a philosopher. "Mommy always said that when we do something wrong, we have to apologize and try to fix it." The childish wisdom struck the man like a bullet. A 6-year-old child had synthesized in one sentence what dozens of lawyers and corporate ethics experts had tried to explain in documents of hundreds of pages. The press conference, the millionaire reached the climax of his confession. "I immediately resign from the presidency of all my companies. I'm donating 80% of my wealth to organizations that care for children in vulnerable situations. And I'm formally asking the court to allow me to assume custody of Ana Santos, not as her biological grandfather, but as someone who owes her a lifetime of reparation." The statement caused an uproar in the hall. Journalists shouted questions, lawyers tried to intervene, and activists reacted with mixtures of surprise and skepticism. It was a twist that no one had foreseen. The villain of the story transforming into a public penitent, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he continued, ignoring the chaos around him. I know my actions are unforgivable, but Anna deserves a family, and I am the only family she has. If the judicial system allows it, if she herself accepts, I dedicate the rest of my life to trying to fix what I destroyed. The press conference ended with him leaving in silence, ignoring the hundreds of questions that exploded around him. But his message had been delivered to the world. A powerful man had chosen truth over convenience, redemption over self-preservation. The public reaction was instantaneous and divided. Some saw the confession as a calculated manipulation to generate sympathy. Others considered it a rare example of genuine responsibility in an era of systematic corporate denial. Psychology experts debated whether the transformation was authentic or performative, but at the hospital, Anna had made her own decision with the clarity that only children possess. I want to talk to him, she said to the security guard. Are you sure, honey? Yes. He said he's sad for hurting me. I want to see if it's true. The request of a 6-year-old child was about to set in motion the final events of a story that had captured the attention of the entire world. Anna Santos, who had survived 3 years alone, was ready to face the man who almost killed her, and perhaps, just perhaps, offer him something he didn't know he needed, a chance for true redemption. The meeting was arranged under the rigorous supervision of the district attorney, with the presence of child psychologists, social workers, and lawyers from both sides. The hospital had provided a private room where Anna could talk to her grandfather without the pressure of the media that still surrounded the building like vultures waiting for carrion. Eduardo Mendonça arrived an hour before the scheduled time. His lawyers had tried to dissuade him until the last moment, arguing that any interaction with Anna could further compromise his legal situation. But he had made a decision that transcended legal calculations. He needed to look into his granddaughter's eyes and try to explain the unexplainable. When Anna entered the room, walking slowly alongside the security guard who had become her protector, the silence was absolute. Grandfather and granddaughter observed each other with mutual curiosity, like two different species trying to recognize each other. She was even smaller than he remembered, fragile and intense, with eyes that seemed to have seen more suffering than any child should endure. "Hello, Anna," he said, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. "Hello," she replied, squeezing the teddy bear against her chest. "Are you my grandfather?" The simple and direct question hit him like a punch. For a week, he had been forced to confront the reality of his grandfatherhood, but hearing the word coming out of her mouth made everything viscerally real. "Yes," he admitted, "I am the father of your father." Anna pondered the information with the seriousness characteristic of children who have been forced to mature prematurely. "My father died before I was born. Mommy told stories about him sometimes." "What kind of stories?" "That he liked music, that he was kind to people, that he would have loved me very much if he were alive." She paused, observing him carefully. "Did you love him?" The question echoed through the room like a divine accusation. Eduardo found himself confronted with decades of regret, with a fatherhood exercised through emotional distance and impossible expectations. He had loved Gabriel, but in the only way he knew how, through control, demands, and indirect demonstrations of affection that his son had never managed to interpret. "Yes," he replied, the words coming out heavy as lead, "but I didn't know how to show it. I wasn't a good father." "Why?" The brutal honesty of childhood offered no escape routes or euphemisms. Anna wanted to understand, and he needed to find words that a 6-year-old could process. "Because I thought that loving meant controlling, that caring meant demanding. I never learned to love the right way." He paused, struggling against emotions he had suppressed for decades. "And when your father died, I thought I had lost my only Chance to fix things. Anna nodded with a wisdom that transcended her age. Mommy said that people sometimes hurt other people because they themselves are hurt inside. The phrase from the dead mother, repeated by the surviving daughter, carried a philosophical depth that left the adults present in silence. Maria Santos, even in death, continued to educate her daughter through lessons of compassion that she had planted in the child's mind. "Your mother was a wise woman," Eduardo said, and for the first time managed to think of Maria Santos as a real person, not just a corporate obstacle he had eliminated. "She was the best person in the world," Anna replied with absolute conviction. "But she went away with the fire, and I was left alone." "I know, and it's my fault." The direct confession surprised everyone in the room. The psychologists had prepared complex strategies to address guilt and responsibility, but the millionaire had opted for brutal honesty. Anna studied him with her big, dark eyes. "Did you kill my mother?" "Not directly, but I did things that caused her to die. I took away her job, prevented her from getting another, forced her to live in dangerous places." He took a deep breath. "And 3 days ago, I almost killed you too." Why? It was the question he had asked himself thousands of times. Since discovering the truth, why had he been so cruel to an innocent child? Why had he set fire to the only home she possessed? "Because I was angry, not with you, but with the world, with life, with myself." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, when people are very sad or angry for a long time, they do very bad things to other people." Anna nodded again. "Like when I was very hungry and yelled at the kittens who wanted to share my food. Then I felt bad and gave half to them." The childish analogy was simultaneously touching and devastating. A 6-year-old child had learned empathy by sharing crumbs with stray cats, while a 52-year-old man had needed to burn down her home to discover his own humanity. "Exactly like that," he agreed. "Only I hurt you much more than you hurt the kittens." "Are you sorry?" "More than anything in my life." Anna remained silent for a long moment, processing information that would challenge experienced adults. Finally, she approached the chair where he was sitting, still squeezing the teddy bear against her chest. "Mommy said that when someone truly apologizes, we have to try to forgive. But she also said that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting." The wisdom contained in the sentence of a 6-year-old child echoed through the room like a lesson in moral philosophy. Eduardo found himself confronted with a forgiveness he didn't deserve, offered by someone who had every reason in the world to hate him. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, knowing he had no right to ask the question. Anna studied him for another moment, then extended a small hand towards him. "I can try, but you have to promise that you will never hurt anyone again." He took her hand carefully, as if it were made of porcelain. "I promise. And you have to help me take care of the kittens that stayed on the lot. They must be hungry." Her concern for abandoned animals, even after having lost her own home, revealed a capacity for compassion that left everyone present emotional. She had survived 3 years alone, but had not allowed suffering to kill her ability to care for other vulnerable beings. "We will take care of the kittens," he promised, and for the first time in decades made a promise that he intended to fulfill not out of legal obligation or strategic advantage, but out of genuine love. The meeting continued for another hour, with Anna asking questions about the father she had never known, and Eduardo sharing memories of Gabriel that he had kept locked in his heart. Slowly, two people destroyed by life began to build a bridge over the abyss that separated them. When Anna finally left the room, she turned around one last time. "Grandpa Eduardo?" "Yes? Can you visit me tomorrow? I want to show you the photos." "I have of mommy." The word grandpa echoed through the hallway like an unexpected blessing. Eduardo Mendonça, who had lost everything, company, reputation, respect, had just gained something he didn't know he had been looking for decades, a family that accepted him not for what he possessed, but for what he could become. 6 months later, life had taken a form that no one could have foreseen. The legal process had dragged on through complex hearings, psychological evaluations, and endless debates about what would be best for Anna. But the final decision had been as surprising as it was appropriate. Shared custody between Eduardo and the security guard, who was now officially called Uncle Carlos, with judicial supervision during the first year. The new house was in a middle-class neighborhood, far from both the luxury skyscrapers and the vacant lots of poverty. It was an intermediate place, symbolically perfect for a family that had been born from the improbable meeting between opposite extremes of society. The backyard had been transformed into a sanctuary for the 7 stray cats that Anna had insisted on rescuing from the lot where she lived before. A small feline colony that had become the joint project that definitively united grandfather and granddaughter. Anna attended a private school, but not the most expensive in the city. Eduardo had learned that excessive demonstrations of wealth could isolate a child as much as extreme poverty. She wore simple uniforms, took lunch in an ordinary lunchbox, and her classmates knew her simply as the girl who had many cats at home. It was exactly the normality that she had lost at the age of 3 and that she was now gradually recovering. Mornings followed a routine carefully established by the psychologists. Anna woke up in her room painted light blue, a color she had chosen because it reminds me of the sky when there are no sad clouds, had breakfast with Eduardo and Uncle Carlos, fed the cats and went to school. It was a revolutionary simplicity for a man who had spent decades waking up alone in sterile penthouses. Eduardo had sold most of his properties, fulfilling the promise to donate the majority of his wealth. What remained was more than enough to provide comfort to Anna without flaunting the power that had almost destroyed her. He had discovered that true wealth was not in the glass towers he owned, but in the drawings that Anna pasted on the refrigerator, in the "Good morning, Grandpa" whispered during breakfast, in the moments when she fell asleep on the sofa watching television and he carried her to bed. The former security guard, Carlos Santos Silva, who had adopted the surname Santos in honor of Maria, had proven to be a natural father. His decades of experience protecting people had naturally transformed into protecting Anna, but with a gentleness that his previous profession had never required. He was the one who helped with homework, who told stories before bed, who knew exactly how to soothe the nightmares that still visited Anna occasionally. The dynamic between the two men had evolved from hostility to mutual respect, and finally, to something akin to friendship. Eduardo had fired Carlos in a moment of arrogance, but now depended on him to learn how to be a father figure. Carlos, in turn, had found purpose in helping both Anna and Eduardo heal from the wounds that life had inflicted on them. "Grandpa," Anna said one Saturday morning, while playing with one of the cats in the garden, "do you remember when you burned down my house?" The question still caught him off guard, even after months. Anna had developed the habit of addressing difficult subjects with the same naturalness with which she asked for help tying her shoes. The psychologists explained that it was her way of processing the trauma, transforming painful moments into everyday conversations until they lost the power to hurt her. "Yes, I remember," he replied, sitting on the grass next to her. "Why did you ask?" "Because I dreamed about that day yesterday, but it wasn't a nightmare." She paused, concentrating on tickling the belly of an orange cat. "In the dream, when you lit the fire, Mommy appeared. She said that everything was okay, that That's how it had to happen for us to find each other. Eduardo felt his eyes fill with tears. Anna had developed an impressive ability to transform tragedy into a narrative of hope, finding meaning in events that still tormented him in sleepless nights. "Do you think your mother would be happy to see us together now?" he asked. "I think so." Anna looked at him with that seriousness that children reserve for the most important truths. She always said that families can be born in different ways, that sometimes the people who should be family don't find each other at the right time, but love always finds a way. The wisdom contained in Maria Santos's words, preserved in her daughter's memory and passed on at the exact moment when Eduardo most needed to hear them, was like receiving a letter of forgiveness from beyond the grave. He had killed Maria Santos through his systematic cruelty, but she continued to educate her daughter with lessons of compassion that transcended death. Uncle Carlos joined them in the garden, carrying a tray with sandwiches and orange juice. It was another weekend ritual that had arisen naturally. Outdoor lunches among the cats, casual conversations that slowly stitched together the broken pieces of 3 devastated lives. "Anna," Carlos said, "a letter arrived from school. It seems you have been chosen to present a project at the science fair." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "It's about the cats. I'm going to explain how to care for abandoned animals and why it's important not to give up on them when they are scared or hurt." The metaphor did not go unnoticed by the 2 men. Anna had transformed her experience of abandonment into a lesson, about not giving up on the vulnerable, about how patience and care could heal wounds that seemed irreversible. It was as if she were telling her own story through the cats, explaining to other children that everyone deserves a second chance. "I need help making posters," she continued, already mentally planning the presentation. "Uncle Carlos can help me with the photos, and Grandpa can help me write the difficult words." The natural division of responsibilities between her 2 caregivers had become automatic. Anna knew instinctively who to turn to for each type of need, creating a network of emotional security that she had never experienced before. That afternoon, while working together on the science fair project, Eduardo reflected on how his life had completely changed. 6 months earlier, he spent weekends analyzing financial reports in empty offices, measuring success through numbers on spreadsheets. Now, his greatest achievement was seeing Anna smile when one of the cats finally let itself be picked up, or hearing her laugh when Uncle Carlos told bad jokes during dinner. The transformation had not been easy or instant. There were days when Anna woke up crying, calling for her mother in nightmares that transported her back to 3 years of solitude. There were moments when Eduardo felt the weight of guilt threatening to crush him, when the magnitude of what he had done became unbearable. And there were situations in which Carlos needed to mediate conflicts between 2 people who were still learning to trust each other. But there were also daily progress that no financial report could quantify. Anna had gained 8 pounds since leaving the hospital. Her hair shone with health, and she had developed the habit of singing softly while doing homework. Eduardo had learned to cook simple dishes, discovered that he liked cartoons, and for the first time in decades slept through the night without nightmares about business decisions. The media had lost interest in the story after the first sensational months. Occasionally, some journalists tried to update the case, but Anna was protected by court orders that prevented her public exposure. She had become a normal child, protected from the media circus that had almost transformed her into a national symbol. Eduardo still faced criminal charges and investigations into his past business practices. He would probably spend a few years doing community service and paying damages to other families he had harmed throughout his career. But those legal consequences seemed irrelevant compared to the opportunity to build a real family with Anna. When night came, Anna insisted on showing the two men what she had written about the cats for the school presentation. With careful handwriting and a few spelling errors that only increased the charm of the text, she had created a story about Whiskers, an orange cat who had lost his family and learned to live alone until he found people who loved him. Whiskers was very scared at first, she read aloud, pointing to a photo of the cat who now slept peacefully on the sofa. He didn't know if he could trust the people who wanted to help, but when he saw that they brought food every day and didn't yell when he peed in the wrong place, he realized that it was safe to love again. The story continued describing how Whiskers had taught other abandoned cats to trust again, creating a chosen family based on mutual care instead of biological obligation. It was a perfect metaphor for her own situation, told through the innocent perspective of a child who had transformed trauma into wisdom. "It's a very beautiful story," Eduardo said, his voice choked with emotion. "Do you think Whiskers is happy now?" "I think so," Anna replied, looking at the cat who purred contentedly. "He still gets sad sometimes because he remembers when he was alone. But now he knows that he will never be alone again." That night, after Anna fell asleep between her two protectors during a movie on the sofa, Eduardo carried her to bed, as he had done hundreds of times in recent months. As he covered her and kissed her forehead, he whispered a promise he made every night. "Never again, honey. Never again will you be alone." Leaving the room, he found Carlos in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the next day. Another domestic ritual that had arisen naturally between two men who had become family by necessity and choice. "Is she okay?" Carlos asked, as he always did. "She's okay," Eduardo replied, and for the first time in 6 months, he really believed it was true. Outside, the city continued to spin in its relentless rhythm of business and ambition. Skyscrapers glittered with the lights of offices where other people pursued riches that could cost their humanity. But inside that simple house, 3 people, whom fate had united in the most improbable way, continued to build something that transcended any monetary value. Ana Santos had lost everything at the age of 3, survived alone for 3 years, and almost died at 6. Eduardo Mendonça had built an empire based on cruelty and lost everything in a matter of days. Carlos Silva had spent his life protecting wealthy people who treated him like invisible furniture. Now, they were a family, imperfect, improvised, born of tragedy and shaped by forgiveness. A girl who had learned to love through stray cats, a man who had discovered humanity almost too late, and another man who had found purpose in caring for both. It was a story that had begun with fire and destruction, but had ended with something much more powerful, the proof that love, even belated, can be reborn from the ashes and change even the most hardened heart. And while Anna slept peacefully, safe in her bed for the first time in years, the 2 men who had become her family continued to stand guard, protecting not only her sleep, but also the improbable miracle that all 3 had managed to build together. The story of Ana Santos had become a legend on social media, a symbol of social injustice and human redemption. But for her, it was simply real life. Waking up every morning knowing that there were people who loved her, cats who depended on her, and a future that finally seemed safe and full of possibilities. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, transforming a national tragedy into an ordinary family story where love prevailed over hate, where forgiveness was possible even in the most extreme circumstances, and where a 6-year-old child could teach 2 adult men that it's never too late to start over and choose to be better. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.